All she wanted was to save a life, not start a war. After treating a wounded Apache warrior at midnight, she woke up at dawn to find his fellow warriors surrounding her house with drawn arrows. What happened next tested her courage and changed the frontier forever. Before we continue, please tell us where you are watching from. As twilight descended like a heavy curtain over the Arizona territory, Margaret, Maggie Evans, felt the familiar chill in her bones. Not the chill of the approaching winter, but the other, emptier chill that had lived in her chest for 2 years, ever since Thomas took his last rattling breath. She brushed a stubborn strand of dark brown hair from her face and surveyed her small farm. The fences were still standing, the chickens were locked up, and the cattle were safe in the barn. Everything was as it should be. Everything except the yawning silence that engulfed her every evening. One more night, she muttered to herself, as she did every evening. One more night alone in the house that had once echoed with laughter and dreams. One more night of staring at Thomas's place at the table, wondering if she was strong enough to carry on. The air smelled of sage and dust, of dry earth that even in October still retained the heat of summer. Maggie took a deep breath and went to the barn to check on the horses. Her boots crunched on the hard floor, the sound echoing in the silence. As she turned the corner of the barn, she saw him. A man was lying curled up at the foot of the wall, motionless like a pile of old clothes. Maggie's heart skipped a beat, and she stood rooted to the spot. In this area, a stranger could mean anything: robbers, desperados, or worse, a wounded Apache warrior. Her hand instinctively reached for the rifle she always carried with her. But something held her back. The man didn't move. Was he still breathing? In the fading light, she could see the dark glint of blood on his shirt. Maggie approached cautiously, every nerve on edge. The stranger was Native American. She could tell from his copper-colored skin, long black hair, and the way he was dressed. An Apache without a doubt. The settlers in the area would declare her insane if she even thought of helping him. But there he lay, helpless like a wounded animal. The way his chest rose and fell weakly reminded her of Thomas in his final days. The same vulnerability, the same silent plea for help. "What are you doing out here?" she whispered, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. His eyes were closed, and his face was contorted in pain, even though he was unconscious. Blood seeped from a deep wound in his side, and his left arm lay at an unnatural angle. Maggie knelt beside him and checked his pulse. It was weak, but steady. At least he was still alive. The wound in his side was deep, but not fatal if she acted quickly. His arm was broken, but that was the least of her concerns. She glanced back over her shoulder at the house. Samuel Price and his men would kill her if they found out that she had helped an Apache. The settlers out here had every reason to fear the Indians. There had been too many raids and too much bloodshed on both sides. But as she looked down at the unconscious man, she didn't see the enemy that everyone had warned her about. She saw a human being in need, and her conscience left her with no alternative. "Thomas would say I've gone mad," she muttered, sliding her arms under the man's body. But he would have done the same. The Apache was heavier than she had expected, but 2 years of hard farm work had made Maggie strong. She laboriously dragged him to the back door of her house, making sure no one could see her. The nearest farm was over a mile away, but you could never be too careful. In the kitchen, she spread an old blanket on the floor and carefully laid him down on it. In the light of the kerosene lamp, she could better assess his injuries. The wound in his side had been caused by a knife or lance, not a bullet. His arm was definitely broken, and he had several smaller cuts and bruises. "Who did this to you?" she asked softly as she lit the fire. And why are you so far from your people?" She washed his wounds with the same gentle care that she had once given to Thomas. The Apache was young, perhaps around 30, with a proud face and hands that showed hard work. A warrior, no doubt, but at that moment, just a wounded man who needed her help. As she stitched the wound in his side, he flinched and muttered something in his own language in his sleep. The words sounded melodic, almost like a prayer. Maggie had once read a book about the Apache language written by a missionary, but she only understood snippets of it. "It's all right," she whispered, stroking his forehead gently. "You're safe." And she thought of the stories circulating in the settlement about Apache raids and stolen children and burned houses. But she also thought of stories about settlers stealing Apache land and killing families. The hatred went both ways, and somewhere in between were people like this man, wounded and vulnerable. She bandaged his broken arm with boards and cloth as she had learned from one of her patients. It wasn't perfect, but it would suffice until he could receive proper treatment. Then she cooked a thin broth and dripped it drop by drop between his lips. "You have to drink," she said softly. "You've lost a lot of blood." Hours passed, and the Apache remained unconscious. Maggie sat next to him on the kitchen floor, watching him breathe. She had no idea what she would do when he woke up. Would he attack her? Would he realize that she had helped him? Shortly after midnight, she heard footsteps outside the house. Maggie's blood ran cold. Who could be coming at this hour? She jumped up and blew out the lamp. Then she peered cautiously through the curtain. Becky Miller was standing at the door with a basket. Maggie breathed a sigh of relief. Becky was her only real friend among the settlers. She was a gentle woman with a big heart and a natural curiosity. "Maggie," she called softly, "I saw a light in your house. Is everything all right?" Maggie glanced at the unconscious Apache, panic-stricken. She couldn't possibly let Becky in, but she also couldn't pretend that no one was home. "I'm coming," she replied, slipping out quickly and closing the door firmly behind her. "Becky, what are you doing out here? It's dangerous to travel alone at night." Becky's friendly face was lined with worry. "Samuel Price came to see us this evening. He's telling everyone that Apache scouts have been seen in the area. John wanted me to tell you, and he sent me with something to eat." She held up the basket. "You haven't been in town for so long." "That's very kind of you." Maggie tried to hide her nervousness. "But as you can see, I'm fine." Becky looked at her closely. "You look pale. Why isn't the light on? You never go to bed this early." "I had a headache. I thought some darkness would help." "Oh, you poor thing." Becky took a step closer to the door.
"Let me in. I'll make you some tea with willow bark in it. It always helps." "No," the word came out sharper than Maggie had intended. "I mean, it's not necessary. I'm feeling better already." Becky's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew Maggie well enough to notice when something was wrong. "Maggie, is someone in there? Is everything okay?" "Of course everything's fine," Maggie said quickly. "I'm just tired, that's all." Becky looked at her searchingly for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if you need me, send Jonas. Yes, no matter what it is." "I will," Maggie promised, taking the basket. "Thanks for dinner." She waited until Becky was out of sight before going back into the house. The Apache was still lying motionless. However, his breathing seemed to have become slightly stronger. Maggie lit the lamp again and knelt down beside him. "You're lucky," she whispered, "but it won't stay that way forever. If Samuel Price really did see scouts, more people will show up here soon. I don't know what I'll do then." She thought of the cellar door under the kitchen. Thomas used the small room as a storeroom, but it was big enough for a person. If the Apache woke up, she could hide him there temporarily at least. But then what? She couldn't hide him forever. Sooner or later, someone would find him, and she would be branded a traitor. The settlers would burn down her house, and they might even lynch her. However, if she let him die now, she would never be able to look at herself in the mirror again. Thomas had taught her that every life was precious, no matter what color your skin was or what you believed in. God doesn't make mistakes, he had always said. We are all his children. Maggie pulled another blanket over the Apache and sat down in her rocking chair. She would watch over him through the night and decide what to do in the morning. Perhaps he would be awake then and able to leave on his own. Maybe everything would be all right. However, when the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window and she awoke from a restless sleep, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Looking out of the window, she could see dozens of figures moving in the morning mist, circling her house like wolves. They were Apache warriors, at least 20 of them, maybe more. They moved silently like ghosts in the twilight, but their intentions were unmistakably clear. Her house was surrounded. Maggie could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. The wounded Apache lay still and unconscious next to her on the floor. His breathing was shallow but steady. Was he the reason for this gathering? Were they looking for him? With trembling hands, she reached for the rifle, leaning against the fireplace. The cold metal surface felt familiar. But what could one woman do against so many warriors? Even if she managed to shoot some of them, the rest would overwhelm her. Through the window, she saw a figure breaking away from the others and heading towards the house. It was a tall man with gray hair and a face weathered by wind and sun. He wore a deerskin shirt and a necklace of bear claws. Even from a distance, Maggie could feel the intensity of his eyes as he scanned the house, as if he could see through the walls. A chieftain? Without a doubt. The way the other warriors looked at him and the way he moved spoke of authority and power. Maggie glanced at the unconscious man at her feet. Was he related to this chieftain? Perhaps a son, which would explain why so many warriors had come. The chief stopped in front of her porch and shouted something in Apache. His deep, commanding voice echoed in the morning silence. Maggie didn't understand the words, but the tone sent a shiver down her spine. She had to go outside. There was no other choice. Hiding would only confirm her guilt, and sooner or later they would storm the house anyway. It was better to face them while she still had a small chance to explain the situation. With the rifle in her hand and pointed downwards, she slowly opened the door. The cold morning air hit her, and she could feel all eyes on her. Some of the warriors drew their bows and aimed their arrows at her. "I am unarmed," she shouted in English, raising one hand while holding the rifle with the other. Then in the few Apache words she had learned from the missionary's book, she said, "No fight. Peace." The chief eyed her with piercing dark eyes. He was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his mid-50s. However, his posture betrayed the strength of a man in his prime. Scars ran across his arms and face, stories of countless battles. He said something to the other warriors, and several of them moved to surround her. Maggie stood stock still, rifle lowered. One more move and she would be dead. The chief stepped closer and spoke again. "This is directed at her." His voice was calm, but Maggie could sense the danger. When she didn't answer, he repeated his words louder. "I don't understand," Maggie said, shaking her head. "Speak in English." One of the younger warriors, a man with wild eyes and fresh war paint, stepped forward and shouted something angrily. He gestured violently towards the house and then towards Maggie. The other warriors nodded in agreement and tightened their grip on their weapons. The chief raised a hand, and the others immediately fell silent. Then, in broken but understandable English, he asked Maggie, "Where is Tassa?" Tassa. So the wounded man had a name after all, and he was important enough to warrant a search by an entire band of warriors. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maggie lied, her voice trembling. "Tassa," he repeated, and this time there was danger in his voice. "My son, there are tracks leading here." He pointed to the ground around their barn. "You have his son." Maggie closed her eyes briefly. She had the son of an Apache chief in her house? The situation could hardly get any worse. "He's hurt," she said finally. The truth seemed to be her only chance. "I helped him." The wild warrior who had spoken earlier leapt forward and shouted something in Apache. His hand flew to his knife, but the chief stopped him with a sharp command. "You're lying," the chief translated. "You poisoned Tassa. You captured him." "No," Maggie stepped forward. even though several bows were immediately aimed at her. I helped him. He was wounded and unconscious. I stitched his wounds and nursed him. Show him, ordered the chief. Maggie hesitated. If she showed Tassa and he was dead or had deteriorated, they would think she had killed him.
However, if she refused, she said, "He's in my house, but I swear to God I haven't done anything to him except help him." The chief, Nantan, as she would later learn, studied her face for a long time. Maggie could feel him searching for signs of deception. She forced herself to hold his gaze, even though her whole body was shaking with fear. "You go first," he finally said. Slowly, Maggie nodded and turned towards the door. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to put one foot in front of the other. Behind her, she could hear the soft footsteps of the warriors following her. When she reached the kitchen, she pointed to the blanket on the floor beneath Tassa. "There," she whispered. Nantan knelt beside his son and pulled back the blanket. Tassa lay peacefully, his chest rising and falling evenly. The bandages that Maggie had applied were clean and professionally done. The chief carefully touched Tassa's forehead and murmured something in Apache. Then he examined the bandages and the splint on the broken arm. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized the quality of the medical care. Chado pushed forward and stared at Tassa in disbelief. He said something quickly and angrily to Nantan, but the chief just shook his head. "Chado says you weakened Tassa," Nantan translated. "You gave him white man's medicine to control him." "That's not true," Maggie protested. "See for yourself. His wounds are clean and healing. I only helped him." Nant touched Tassa's forehead, then his wrists, checking his pulse. Tassa muttered something in his sleep and turned his head slightly to one side. "He's dreaming," Nantan said quietly. For the first time, Maggie heard something like relief in his voice. "Sick dreams or peaceful ones?" Maggie watched Tassa's face. It was relaxed, almost serene. "Peaceful, I think. He slept peacefully all night." Nant nodded slowly. Then he stood up and looked Maggie straight in the eye. "Why? Why? What? Why are you helping the Apaches? Your people hate mine. They want to kill my people." The question hit Maggie like a blow. She thought of Thomas and his gentle words about the dignity of all life. She thought of the lonely nights when she had craved human connection. "Because he's a human being," she said finally. "Because he needed help and I could help him. My late husband taught me that all people are God's children." Chado spat contemptuously and said something harsh in Apache. The other warriors murmured in agreement. Nantan raised his hand again to silence them. "Chado says white men talk about God, but they kill Apache children," he translated. "Tell her she is lying." "I'm not lying," Maggie replied firmly. "Yes, there are evil people among my people, just as there are evil people among yours, but that doesn't make them all evil." Nant looked at her for a long time. "You're here alone?" "Yes." "Where's your husband?" "Dead. Fever. 2 years ago." "Children?" Maggie shook her head, and an old pain shot through her. She and Thomas had wanted children, but it had never happened. "Why do you stay? It's dangerous to be alone." The question surprised her. "This is my home," she said simply. "Thomas and I built it together. It's all I have." Something in Nantan's eyes changed. Perhaps it was understanding or respect. He turned to the other warriors and spoke quickly in Apache. A heated discussion ensued, with Chado being the loudest. Tassa shifted restlessly and muttered again. This time his words sounded clearer and more deliberate. Nant immediately knelt down beside him. "Tassa," he said softly, "my son." But Tassa remained unconscious, his eyes closed. Nant placed a hand on his head and murmured something that sounded like a prayer. "He'll live," Maggie said quietly. "The wounds aren't fatal. He just needs time and rest." Nantan looked at her. "You're staying with him?" The question surprised her. "They won't kill me? My son is alive. You helped him." He hesitated. "But the others in my community don't trust you. They say, wait and see if Tassa recovers or dies." That wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was better than an immediate death. Maggie nodded. "I'll stay with him. I'll keep helping him."
Chado said something angrily, but Nantan replied sharply. The young warrior fell silent, but his eyes flashed with rage. "We're staying too," Nantan told Maggie. "My warriors will surround your house if Tasa dies." He left the sentence unfinished, but the threat was clear. Maggie swallowed hard. "What if other settlers come when they see the warriors?" Nantan shrugged. "Then we'll fight. But that would mean war, bloodshed. Innocent people will die." "Innocent people are already dying," Nantan said bitterly. "Every day, Apaches die at the hands of whites, and every day whites die at the hands of Apaches. One day more or less makes no difference." "There must be another way," Maggie protested. "There must be." Nantan looked at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. "Maybe," he said finally, "but Tatsa will decide when he wakes up. If he wakes up, that is." With these words, he left the house followed by the other warriors. Only Chado remained a moment longer, his mistrusting gaze fixed on Maggie. "I'm watching you," he said in broken English. "You're doing the wrong thing. I'm going to kill you." Then he was gone, leaving Maggie alone with the unconscious Tasa. She could see the warriors spreading out in strategic positions around her house outside. Her home had become a fortress, and she was both doctor and prisoner. She knelt beside Tasa and checked his bandages. "Wake up," she whispered. "Please wake up. I don't know how long I can hold them off." But Tasa remained unconscious, and Maggie could only wait and pray that her kindness would not spark a war costing more lives than she could ever hope to save. The sun was already high in the sky when Maggie dared to move away from the window for the first time in hours. The Apache warriors had taken up their positions. Some were hidden among the bushes, and others were on the roof of her barn. All of them had a view of the house and the access roads. It was the perfect siege, and she was trapped in the middle of it. Tasa had moved several times in the last few hours, muttering in his language and grimacing as if he were fighting invisible demons. Maggie changed his bandages and poured more broth into his mouth. His forehead was warm but not feverish, a good sign. "Come on," she whispered, gently stroking his face. "Your father is waiting outside. He's worried about you." As if he had heard her, Tasa's eyelids fluttered. Maggie held her breath and leaned closer. His eyes opened slowly. At first they were blurry and confused. Then they focused on her face. He stared at her for a long moment, and Maggie saw consciousness return to his dark eyes. He tried to sit up, but groaned in pain and slumped back down again. "Slowly," Maggie said gently in English. Then she tried one of the Apache words she knew. "Carefully." Tasa looked at her intently. His eyes wandered over her face and clothes, then rested on the clean bandages on his body. He said something in Apache. His voice was hoarse and weak.
"I don't understand," said Maggie. "Do you speak English?" "English," he repeated slowly, as if weighing the word. "Yes, a little." His voice was deep and rough from sleep. "You a white woman?" "Yes, I'm Maggie Evans. You're on my land, in my house." Tasa tried to sit up again, and this time Maggie helped him carefully. He leaned against the wall and pressed a hand against his bandaged side. "Why?" he asked. In that one word lay a world of confusion. "They were badly hurt. I couldn't let them die." Tasa studied her face, as if looking for signs of deception. "You're helping Apache?" "I help people," Maggie replied simply. A shadow flitted across Tasa's face. "Your people hate my people." "Some do, just as some of your people hate mine." Maggie hesitated, then added, "But hate doesn't heal wounds." Tasa was silent for a long time, his eyes thoughtful. Then he asked, "My father is outside with many warriors. They have come looking for her." "Nantan is here." Tasa's eyes widened. "How many?" 20, maybe more. They're surrounding my house." Tasa tried to stand up again, and this time Maggie helped him carefully. He leaned against the wall and pressed a hand against his bandaged side. "Why?" he asked. In that one word lay a world of confusion. "They were badly hurt. I couldn't let them die." Tasa studied her face as if looking for signs of deception. "You're helping Apache?" I help people, Maggie replied simply. A shadow flitted across Tassa's face. Your people hate my people. Some do, just as some of your people hate mine. Maggie hesitated, then added, but hate doesn't heal wounds. Tassa was silent for a long time, his eyes thoughtful. Then he asked, my father has come for me, but he wants me to trust you first. Trust? Why would he trust me? Tassa's eyes filled with tears. Because you saved my son's life. I am Nantan, and you are under my protection. Maggie's heart sunk. The settlers were coming. She could make out Samuel Price and Jonas Miller, Becky's son, riding alongside one of the men. Settlers are coming, she announced. Immediately, all the Apaches in the room tensed. Chaco reached for his knife while the other warriors moved towards the windows. How many? 7, 8 or 9? They're armed. Nantan gave quick orders in Apache, after which the warriors left the house to take up their positions. Only he, Chato, and one other warrior remained with Tassa. They will fight. If the settlers attack, my people will fight. But Jonas is just a child. He's only 10 years old. Tassa was surprised. Do you know these people? They are my neighbors. Jonas's mother is my friend. Tassa and Nantan exchanged glances. Then Tassa said, go and talk to them. Tell them that I am here, but tell them to come in peace. They won't believe me. They'll think I'm a traitor. Tassa agreed. But if you don't try, there will be bloodshed. And the child? Maggie looked out at the approaching group. Samuel Price rode ahead, his face set in determination. She could see the tension in his shoulders and the way he held his rifle. If I go out and convince them to leave, she said, what then? They'll just come back with more men. Then we'll find another solution, but right now we can prevent violence. Maggie nodded slowly. All right. But if something goes wrong, she said, I'll speak for you. You saved my life. Now I'll try to save yours. With that, Maggie grabbed her scarf and prepared to go outside and fight for peace, armed only with words against the fear and hatred that threatened to tear her world apart. Outside, the horsemen were getting closer, and she could hear Samuel Price shouting, Maggie Evans, we know you're in there. Come out and explain yourself. Maggie took a deep breath, whispered a prayer, and opened the door to face her fate. The morning sun blinded her as she stepped out onto the porch. Samuel Price sat tall in the saddle, his weather-beaten face set in determination. 8 other armed men rode beside him, all with the tense posture of men expecting trouble. And there was Jonas Miller, the little boy, sitting innocently and curiously among the adults.
Maggie Evans, Samuel called out in a loud voice. We followed Apache warriors' tracks to your hut. Explain yourself. Maggie stepped slowly down from the porch, her hands visible and empty. She was painfully aware that Apache warriors were lying in wait all around her, bows drawn and ready to fight. One wrong word or move, and the bloodbath would begin. Samuel, she said calmly, I can explain, but first, Jonas shouldn't be here. This is no place for a child. The boy stays, Samuel growled. He's learning what happens to traitors who do business with savages. I'm no traitor, Maggie said firmly. I don't do business with anyone. Tom Warner, a younger man with nervous eyes, cocked his rifle. Then explain why Apache footprints lead straight to your door. Because a wounded man needed help, Maggie replied. Would you let a wounded Apache die? Without hesitation, Samuel spat into the dust. Those savages have killed enough of us. Jake Morrison and Bill Hendricks were both killed by Apaches. And how many Apaches have died at our hands? Maggie asked quietly. Can we never stop the bloodshed? Samuel laughed bitterly. You talk like a fool, woman. Those savages only understand violence. Show them kindness, they'll just take it as weakness. Out of the corner of her eye, Maggie saw movement. The Apache warriors were changing their positions and coming closer. The situation was hanging in the balance.
"Listen, Samuel," she said desperately. "I understand your fear. We have all suffered losses. But revenge won't bring back the dead. It will only create more death." "Where are you?" Tom Warner interrupted. "Where are you hiding her?" Before Maggie could answer, an Apache warrior rose out of nowhere from the bushes next to the riders. Then another, and then another. Within seconds, the settlers were surrounded by dozens of warriors with their bows drawn and arrows aimed at the riders. The horses snorted and pranced nervously. Jonas Miller gasped in fright and clung to his saddle. Samuel Price cursed and reached for his rifle, but the sound of the soft hissing stopped him. "Nobody move," Maggie said loudly. "Please, nobody move." Nantan stepped out of the shadow of the barn, his posture simultaneously dignified and menacing. He said something in Apache, and immediately all noise ceased. Even the birds seemed to fall silent. "That's Chief Nantan," Maggie explained in a trembling voice. "He and his warriors are not here to attack. They're looking for a wounded member of their tribe." "Liar," Samuel spat. "Those are war paint. They're here to kill." Jonas Miller began to cry. His soft, sobbing sounds tore Maggie's heart apart. She stepped closer to him. "It's okay, Jonas," she said gently. "No one will hurt you." Samuel laughed harshly. "How can you promise that?" "These savages are people," Maggie interrupted. "Just like us." "People," Samuel snorted. "They killed my sister in a raid 3 years ago. They scalped her."
"And you and your soldiers killed Apache women and children last week," Maggie said calmly, "and that's supposed to be better." Samuel fell silent, but his eyes glowed with anger. The other settlers murmured uneasily. Tom Warner moved his finger to the trigger, and immediately 6 Apache bows were drawn. "Not Tom!" Maggie cried. "Think of your wife and children. Do you want to leave them as widows and orphans? It would be better for them to die at your hands than at the hands of the savages later." Tom growled but lowered his rifle slightly. It was then that the front door opened behind Maggie. Tesa appeared in the doorway, supported by one of the warriors but standing upright. His bandages were visible, and he was clearly in pain, but he stood tall. "There he is," whispered one of the settlers. "The savage! She hid!" Tesa spoke to his father in Apache. Then he turned to the settlers. In broken English, he said, "I am Tesa, son of Nantan. This woman saved my life." Samuel laughed contemptuously. "And now we're supposed to be grateful to you." "You should be grateful to her," Tesa replied calmly. "She could have let me die. Instead, she took a risk and helped me, even though she knew her people would hate her for it." "Damn right we are," Tom Warner shouted, but Jonas Miller stared at Tesa with wide eyes. "You speak English?" he said in a child's voice. Tesa smiled weakly. "A little. Learned from traders." "Missionaries? Are you a real Indian chief?" Jonas asked curiously, ignoring the sharp glances of the adults. "No," replied Tesa. "I'm just a warrior, but my father is a chief." He pointed to Nantan, who was watching the conversation with a stony face. "Why were you hurt?" Jonas asked. Tesa hesitated, then answered honestly. "Soldiers. I was a scout. I was tracking settlers. The soldiers found me, and we fought." "You were a spy," Samuel said coldly. "I was a protector of my people," Tesa corrected. "Just as you are protectors of yours." The settlers seemed surprised by the simple truth of these words. Maggie saw their faces change as they looked at Tesa with new eyes. "That doesn't change anything," Samuel said, but his voice sounded less certain. "You're still an enemy." "Am I?" asked Tesa. "Did I attack anyone today? Did my people attack anyone today?" "Not yet," admitted Tom Warner. "And we won't," said Tesa firmly. "Not today. Not as long as this woman is under our protection." "Under your protection," Samuel laughed incredulously. "She's a white woman. She belongs to us." "She belongs to no one," Tesa said calmly. "She is a free woman. She made her own choice. She chose to save lives instead of letting them die." Maggie felt tears welling up in her eyes. No one had ever defended her like that before, not even Thomas. These words came from a man she hardly knew, who came from a different world. "That's enough talk," said Samuel, raising his rifle. "Maggie Evans, you're coming with us. You'll have to answer to the other settlers." His voice was calm, yet unyielding. Nantan had stepped closer, and although he spoke English, he had a heavy accent. "She's staying here." "That's not your decision, you savage." Nantan bowed his head slightly. "It is my decision. She saved my son's life. Now she is under our protection." "She's a white woman," Samuel repeated. "She belongs to her own kind." "Her own kind," Nantan said slowly, "wants to kill her for her kindness, wants to punish her for her humanity." He shook his head. "Perhaps she does not belong to you." Jonas Miller looked back and forth between the adults, his young eyes full of confusion. "Why is everyone so angry?" he asked. "The woman just helped, didn't she?" When it came from a child, it sounded so simple and clear. Maggie saw some of the men shift uncomfortably. It was Tom Werner who finally lowered his rifle. "The boy is right," he said quietly. "Maggie only did what any Christian would have done." "Tom," Samuel spun around to face him, "you can't." "I can," Tom interrupted. "I have a daughter Jonas's age. If she were hurt, I would want someone like Maggie to help her, no matter what color her skin was." Other men nodded hesitantly. Samuel saw his support crumbling. "You're all fools!" he shouted.
"Those savages will slaughter us all in our beds." "We won't," Tassa said firmly. "We had a chance today, and we didn't take it. Why? Because this woman showed us another way." "What other way?" Jonas asked curiously. Tassa smiled weakly. "Are they waking up? Understanding, she saw me not as an enemy, but as a wounded human being. She helped me even though her people wouldn't understand." Maggie stepped forward. "It must be possible," she told everyone, settlers and Apaches alike. "It must be possible to live without hatred and constant fear of each other." "That's a beautiful dream," Samuel said bitterly, "but dreams don't kill soldiers. Dreams don't bring back dead sisters." "No," Maggie agreed, "but hatred won't bring them back either. Hatred only creates more death and grief." She looked over at Jonas. "What kind of world do we want to leave this child? One full of fear and violence? Or can we create something better?" The men were silent, each lost in his own thoughts. The Apache warriors held their positions, but the tension in the air had shifted slightly. It was Nantan who finally broke the silence. "My son is right," he said in English. "This woman has shown us another way. Maybe it's time to try it." Samuel spat into the dust. "You've all gone mad, but I won't forget this. I won't forget who switched sides." He turned his horse around. "Come on, men. Let's leave the traitor with her new friends." But only 3 men followed him. The others remained, their eyes fixed thoughtfully on Maggie and Tassa. "What happens now?" asked Tom Werner. Tassa, leaning heavily on the doorframe, replied, "Let's try to find a new way for all our peoples." But as the sun rose higher and the first tender signs of understanding appeared, Maggie knew that the greatest test was yet to come. Samuel Price would return, and when he did, he would not come alone. Samuel Price would return, and when he did, he would not come alone. The peace they had forged that morning was as fragile as the first ice of winter. One wrong move, and everything would shatter. The hours after Samuel Price's departure passed in a strange, tense calm. Tom Werner and 3 other settlers had stayed behind and were now sitting awkwardly on Maggie's porch, drinking the coffee she had offered them. Jonas Miller played with a few stones in the dust, occasionally glancing curiously at the Apache warriors who were still guarding the hut. Tassa had gone back inside to rest, but his presence was still palpable, like a bridge between 2 worlds separated by blood for too long. "This isn't going to work,"
Tom Warner said quietly to Maggie, twirling his coffee mug. "You know that, right? Samuel will come back, and when he does, he'll bring half the settlement with him." "Maybe," Maggie replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But what's the alternative? That we all kill each other until there's no one left?" Another settler, Mrs. Evans, spoke up. "I understand what you're trying to do," he continued, "but people are afraid. My wife hasn't been able to sleep at night since the raid started." "And do you think Apache women sleep better?" Maggie asked gently. "You think they're not afraid for their children?" Ben fell silent, but Maggie could see him thinking about her words. Nanton stepped out of the shadow of the barn and approached the porch. The settlers visibly tensed, but he raised a hand in a peaceful gesture. "I want to talk," he said in heavily accented English. "Speak," Maggie encouraged him. Nanton looked at each of the men in turn. "I am old. I have seen many winters, much war, much death." He paused, searching for the right words. "I am tired of death." Tom Warner leaned forward. "Then stop fighting," he said. "Can't," Nanton replied calmly. "I must protect the land and my family, just like you." "The land is ours now," said Ben Crawford, but his voice sounded less convincing than his words. "Land belongs to no one," Nanton corrected. "The land is, how do you say, borrowed from the spirits of our ancestors and the children who have not yet been born." Jonas Miller looked up from his stones. "My mum says God made the land for all people." The adults looked down at the boy in surprise. Nanton smiled. Maggie had never seen him smile before. "Your mum is wise," he said to Jonas. "Children sometimes understand what adults have forgotten." The sun was already low when Becky Miller rode up on her horse. Her face was pale with worry, and she jumped off before the horse had come to a complete stop. "Jonas," she cried, running towards her son. "My God, I was so worried." "Mom!" Jonas jumped up and hugged her. "I met real Apache warriors, and they're not at all like everyone says." Becky held her son tightly and gave Maggie a reproachful look. "Maggie, how could you put a child in such a situation?" "She didn't do anything," Tom Warner interrupted. "It was my decision to bring the boy along. To be honest, he showed more sense than all of us put together." Becky glanced nervously at the Apache warriors who were watching them from a respectful distance. "Is it true what Samuel said that you're hiding an Apache in your house?" "I'm not hiding anyone," Maggie said calmly. "I'm helping an injured person." "An injured Apache warrior," corrected Becky. "An injured person," repeated Maggie firmly. Becky shook her head. "Maggie, you don't understand. Samuel has stirred up half the settlement. He's telling everyone that you're a traitor and an Apache lover. People are angry and frightened." "How angry?" Tom Warner asked sharply. "Angry enough to ride here at sunset?" replied Becky quietly, thinking of torches and ropes. A cold shiver ran down Maggie's spine. "Ropes? Samuel is talking about hanging you," Becky whispered, warning anyone else who might sympathize with the Apache. Nanton, who had been listening to the conversation, said something sharp in Apache. Immediately his warriors moved, took up new positions and prepared to defend themselves. "No," Maggie said quickly, "no fighting. That will only make things worse." "What do you suggest?" Tom Warner asked. "That we just let you hang?" "I suggest we try to talk reasonably. With a mob? Maggie, you're more naive than I thought." As the sun sank behind the mountains, they could see lights in the distance, torches moving through the twilight like angry stars. The mob was coming. Tassa reappeared in the doorway, supported by one of his men, determined to stay on his feet. "How many?" he asked. 20, maybe 30, estimated Tom Warner, who was looking through binoculars. "They have ropes, torches, and weapons. They're all armed." Tassa nodded, grimly. "My father, we should go. Take Maggie with us. We'll be safe in Bergen." "No," Maggie said firmly. "I'm not running away. This is my home." "Your home won't do you any good if you're dead." "And what about you? You're here too. They'll brand you as traitors." The men exchanged worried glances. They hadn't thought of that.
Samuel Price's was the loudest. Bring out the traitor! It's time for justice! Nantan gave quick orders in Apache. His warriors disappeared into the darkness, positioning themselves for battle. But Maggie knew that this should not be a fight. She stepped into the center of the yard, her hands raised but empty. "Samuel," she called into the night, "I'm here. You don't need to fight." The mob stopped and formed a semicircle in front of her house. The torches cast wild shadows, distorting the familiar faces and making them look demonic. Samuel Price rode forward with a rope in his hand. "Maggie Evans," he shouted in a thunderous voice, "you are accused of collaborating with the enemy, of betraying your own kind." "I am accused of being human," Maggie replied calmly. "Is that now a crime?" "If it means helping the Apaches, then yes." Samuel swung the rope over his head. "You hid a warrior who was spying on our people. You are a spy and a traitor." "I am a woman who helped a dying man," Maggie corrected him. "Nothing more, nothing less." "Lies," someone shouted from the mob. "Apache lover." Maggie could feel her face burning, but she stood her ground. "Yes, I helped an Apache, and I would do it again, just as I would help any one of you if you were lying wounded at my door." "That's different," Samuel shouted. "We are your people." "All people are my people," Maggie replied. "Or should they be?" It was then that the first torch flew through the air. It landed on the fence next to the barn, setting the dry wood alight immediately. Others followed, and soon the fire was blazing brightly in the night. "Burn her out!" someone shouted. "Burn the traitor!" But before more torches could be thrown, something unexpected happened. Tassa emerged from the house, standing upright despite his injuries, and slowly approached the mob. "Stop!" he shouted in a surprisingly strong voice. "I am the Apache you seek." The mob fell silent, all eyes fixed on the proud figure standing before them. "I am Tassa, son of Nantan. If you want to hang someone for Apache deeds, hang me, but leave this woman alone. She has shown nothing but kindness." Samuel Price stared at him, then he laughed harshly. "Ha ha! You call it kindness when she hides a spy? I call it kindness when she saves a dying man," Tassa replied. "What do you call it when you want to kill an innocent woman for her humanity?" The question hung in the night air. Some of the men in the mob lowered their weapons, looking doubtful. It was then that Jonas Miller stepped out of the shadows where his mother had tried to hide him. The little boy walked straight up to Tassa and stood beside her. "Leave him alone," Jonas cried in his thin child's voice. "He's nice. He told me how Apache children play." "Jonas, come back!" Becky shouted, but her son remained where he was. Tom Werner also stepped forward. "The boy is right," he said loudly. "We came here to fight an enemy, but all I see here is a wounded man and a kind woman." More settlers left the mob and stood beside Maggie and Tassa. Even some of Samuel's companions began to hesitate. "You've all gone mad," Samuel shouted, but his authority was crumbling. "These savages will kill us all." "No," said a deep voice from the darkness. Nantan stepped towards the burning fences, followed by his warriors. "We will not kill anyone, not tonight." He looked first at Maggie, then at his son, and finally at little Jonas, who stood bravely between them. "This woman gave my son life. She gave him life when she could have let him die. That is great medicine, strong magic." He turned to Samuel Price. "You want to kill a woman for being kind? That is evil magic. It is weak magic." Samuel raised his rifle, but a dozen Apache bows were now aimed at him. "You can all kill me," he growled, "but others will come. Hundreds. You can't stop us all." "We don't have to," Nantan replied calmly, "because you've already lost." "What do you mean?" Nantan pointed to the settlers who had turned away from Samuel. Your own people see the truth. They see that you preach hatred, while this woman preaches love." Samuel looked around and realized that his mob had dispersed. A handful of men remained with him, and even they seemed uncertain. "This isn't over," he threatened, but his voice sounded hollow. "This isn't over yet." With these words, he turned his horse and rode off into the night, followed by his last remaining supporters. The settlers and Apaches remained behind, looking at each other in the flickering light of the dying fires. No longer enemies, they were now human beings who for a moment had looked beyond their fear. Maggie sank to her knees, exhausted from the tension of the last few hours. Tassa staggered, but Tom Werner supported him before he could fall. "Is it over?" asked Jonas in his childlike voice. Maggie looked over at the burning fence, then at the faces around her. Apaches and settlers united in a fragile moment of understanding. "No," she said quietly, "it's just beginning." The first rays of the morning sun broke through the darkness, recreating the world like golden fingers. Maggie awoke on her own porch, a blanket draped around her that she didn't remember putting on. The events of the night felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare from which she had finally awakened. The farmstead around her was full of life, but it was a life that she had never experienced before. Apache warriors worked alongside settlers to repair the burned-down fences. Tom Werner and an Apache warrior she had met named Ayanna lifted a new fence post together. Jonas Miller sat in the grass, fascinated, as a young Apache taught him how to weave small figures out of twigs. "You're awake," said a familiar voice. Tassa was sitting on a chair next to the porch. His arm was still bandaged, just as she had seen it before. "How long have I been asleep?" Maggie asked, rubbing her eyes. 3 hours, maybe 4. "You were exhausted." Maggie looked out at the hustle and bustle. "All of this? Did it really happen?" Tassa smiled. "You mean the Apache and the settlers working together?" "Yes, it happened. It's still happening." Becky Miller came out of the kitchen carrying a tray of steaming cups of coffee. She handed coffee to everyone, both Apache and settlers. Her initial fear had given way to cautious curiosity. "Good morning, Maggie," she said, smiling tiredly but sincerely. "I hope you don't mind me using your kitchen. These men were hungry." "Of course not," Maggie replied, standing up. "Thank you for helping." Nantan joined them, his posture respectful yet relaxed. He held something in his hands that looked like a woven fabric with intricate patterns. "For you," he said to Maggie, holding out the gift. "From my people. It is a symbol of honor and of being forever welcome among the Apaches." Maggie took the belt with trembling hands. The weaving was exquisite. Every thread seemed to tell a story. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Nantan replied. "You've already said everything with your actions, not your words." Tom Werner came over to them, with sweat on his forehead, but looking satisfied.
"The fences are almost finished. I have to say, these Apaches know how to work. We Apache are learning from the settlers too," Anana replied in broken English. "New ways of joining wood are good." It was this simple exchange, this willingness to learn rather than condemn, that touched Maggie the most. Here in her little yard, history was being made. "What happens now?" she asked Tassa. He thought for a moment. "Now we have to consolidate the new way. Samuel Price will return with reinforcements, and some of my people, like Chato, don't trust this piece." "Where is Chato, by the way?" "He rode off before sunrise. He says I've been cursed by white magic." Tassa smiled bitterly. "Maybe he's right, but if it's a curse, it's a good one." Jonas Miller ran over to them, his eyes shining with excitement. "Maggie, Maggie, look what Kane taught me!" He held up a small doll made of twigs and grass. "It's an Apache warrior." "That's beautiful, Jonas," said Maggie, kneeling down to admire his work. "Kane says that when I show it to my friends in town, they'll realize that Apaches aren't evil, just different." "From the mouths of babes," Becky murmured, shaking her head. "They understand it so much better than we adults do." A new sound made everyone look up. Approaching horsemen. For a moment, everyone froze, ready for another confrontation. But it wasn't Samuel Price who was coming. It was a lone rider wearing the uniform of a cavalry officer. As it turned out, he was Major Daniel Hayes from Fort McDowell, a weather-beaten man of middle age with tired eyes. He stopped in front of the strange spectacle. Apaches and settlers were working peacefully together. His hand automatically rested on his saber, but he did not draw it. "This is unusual," he said finally. "Good morning, Major," Maggie greeted him politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here because of reports of Apache activity in this area. I was expecting to find a massacre, or at least a raid." He looked around in confusion. "But what exactly do I see here?" Tassa rose slowly from his chair, his posture dignified, despite his bandages. "You see peace, Major. Something you probably didn't expect." Major Hay eyed Tassa sharply. "You are Apache. I am Apache. And you are not here to fight?" "No, I am here to heal and to learn." The Major was silent for a long time. His gaze wandered over the mixed group. "Do you understand that this is problematic for the army and the authorities?" Nantan stepped forward. "Do you understand, Major, that war is also problematic for all our peoples?" "I understand that very well," replied Halize. "Perhaps better than you think. I have lost too many good men in this conflict. On both sides." "Then help us," said Maggie suddenly. "Help us build something better." The Major laughed bitterly. "Woman, I'm a soldier. I follow orders, and my orders are to suppress Apache uprisings." "But this isn't an uprising," protested Tom Werner. "This is the opposite of that." "That may be, but Washington sees it differently. To them, a good Apache is a dead Apache." "What about you?" asked Tassa calmly. Major Hay hesitated for a long time. "To me, a good Apache is one I don't have to fight." It was an honest answer, if not particularly inspiring, but it was a start. "Stay for lunch," Maggie offered. "See for yourself what's being built here." "I shouldn't." "You should," interrupted Nantan. "You should be able to report to your superiors what you really saw, not what you expected to see." The Major looked indecisive for a moment, then dismounted. "I'll give you an hour, then I have to get back." The hour turned into 2, then 3. Major Hay ate with the others, listened to their stories, and observed the cautious friendship developing between the former enemies. When he finally left, he looked thoughtful. "I can't promise anything," he told Maggie, "but I'll word my report carefully. Maybe this can go on for a while." Once the Major had left, everyone gathered around Maggie's kitchen table. Apaches and settlers sat together, drinking coffee and discussing practical matters. Irrigation, cattle breeding, and winter supplies were among the topics discussed. "What we have here is precious," Tassa told the group, "but it is also fragile. We must be careful to preserve it." "What do you suggest?" asked Tom Werner. "Regular meetings, exchanges, and trade, and slowly building trust." Becky nodded. "I could bring other women. Women often understand better than men that children are children, no matter what color their skin is. And we can bring Apache women," Anana agreed. "We can show that we're not just warriors." The plans were taking shape. A weekly market, working together on large projects, and maybe even a school where Apache and settler children could learn together. "It won't be easy," warned Nantan. "Many on both sides will call us traitors." "Then we'll be traitors," Maggie determinedly. "Traitors to hatred and fear. That's a betrayal I can be proud of." As the day drew to a close, the Apache warriors began to gather to leave. Tassa was well enough to ride, despite Maggie's advice to stay another day. "I have to go," he told her as they stood on the porch. "My people are waiting, but I'll be back. Promise me." "I promise." On the first market day in a week. He hesitated, then added, "You saved me more than my life, Maggie Evans. You showed me that there is another way, a better way. We found it together." She corrected him. "All of us together. Tassa nodded, then mounted his horse. Until next week. Until next week. She watched the Apache warriors disappear into the twilight.
They were not leaving as enemies, but as friends who had promised to return. The settlers stayed a while longer to help with the final repairs, and then they rode home too. Tom Werner was the last to leave. "Maggie," he said, "what you've done will change the world. Maybe not the whole world, but our little corner of it." "We did it," she corrected him. "All of us, together." When everyone had left, Maggie stood alone in her garden. But it was a different kind of loneliness to before. The loneliness of grief had been replaced by the silence of possibility. She looked first to where Samuel Price's gang had stood, and then to where the Apaches and settlers had worked together. The contrast couldn't have been greater. In the distance, she heard the sound of approaching hooves. For a moment, she tensed, then relaxed again. It was just a single rider. Becky Miller was returning alone this time. "I had to come back," she said, dismounting. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For opening my eyes, for being brave when I was afraid, for showing me what humanity really means." The two women embraced, and Maggie felt something she hadn't felt since Tom's death. The warmth of true friendship. "What will happen now?" asked Becky. Maggie looked up at the stars appearing one by one in the sky. "I don't know exactly, but for the first time in a long time, I am no longer lonely. For the first time, I truly believe that peace is possible, even if Samuel Price comes back, especially then, because now I know that we are not alone. There are others who believe in a better way." They stood there silently, gazing out into the night. Somewhere out there, challenges, setbacks, and perhaps even violence awaited them. But here, in this small courtyard, a seed had been planted, a seed of understanding, hope, and love. Maggie knew, with the certainty of someone who had experienced death and rebirth, that this seed would grow. It would take time. It would need care. It would have to weather storms, but it would grow. The door to a new world was open, and there was no turning back, only moving forward into a future that they would create together. Apache and settlers, men and women, adults and children. They were a family not bound by blood, but something stronger. They had chosen to remain human, despite all their differences. Maggie smiled into the night, knowing that Thomas would have been proud of her. Not only had she saved a life, she had also built a bridge over an abyss of fear and hatred. Tomorrow, the real work would begin.